Legend says the death of Medusa lasted only 3 seconds, the time it takes a blade to cross a throat. But her turning into a monster had taken years, a slow agony in which she lost one by one everything that had ever made her human. When the hero raised her head high like a trophy, the men cheered. Another beast destroyed, another threat wiped from the world. No one stopped to ask how that monster had been born. No one cared to know. And that, precisely, is the story almost no one ever tells. You know Medusa. Everyone does. The woman with serpents for hair. The creature whose gaze turned men to stone. The monster a hero had to kill. But that image, the monster, is only half the legend. And it is, conveniently, the half that best suited those who told it. Because in the myth, Medusa was not born a monster. She was born human. And what turned her into the most feared creature in all of Greece was not fate, nor a punishment she earned through pride. It was something far darker. Something to do with a god, a goddess, and an injustice the ancient world chose to disguise for centuries. This is the legend of Medusa. It begins long before the sword. Legend says Medusa was born into a family that was not human. Her parents were Phorcys and Ceto, two ancient sea deities, primordial beings born when the ocean still held secrets even the gods of Olympus did not know. From that blood came 3 sisters, the ones the myth would call the Gorgons, Stheno, Euryale, and the youngest of the 3, Medusa. But between them was one difference, and that difference would change everything. Stheno and Euryale were born immortal, creatures of scales, with wings of bronze and sharpened claws, monstrous from their first breath. Medusa, though, was born different, born mortal, soft, fragile, human. The only one of her line who could ever age, the only one who could one day die. She grew up feeling different. While her sisters swept across the sky above the waves, she walked the shore, barefoot on the sand, always looking toward the same point in the distance. Because far away, on a hill, something called to her, though she did not yet know why. White columns shining against the sky. The temple of Athena, goddess of wisdom. And the legend says that still very young, Medusa made the choice that would mark her whole life. She left the sea behind, left her family behind, and climbed to that temple to serve as a priestess of Athena. Serving Athena was no ordinary role. It demanded absolute purity, discipline, a lifetime of vows, chastity, silence, total devotion to the goddess. The priestesses were the face of Athena on earth, and any stain on their conduct was a stain on the honor of the goddess herself. Medusa gave herself to that role like no one before her. She memorized every prayer. She mastered every ritual. She rose before all the others to clean the altars in the half-light of dawn. She did not want to be admired. She wanted a purpose, and among the sacred words she repeated 1,000 years, she found it. Legend says those were the most peaceful years of her life. At dawn, she lit the oil lamps one by one and watched the light slowly wake the stone faces of the gods out of the shadows. She gathered flowers and shells on the shore to adorn the altar. She sang alone in the silence of the empty sanctuary before the first pilgrim of the day arrived. For Medusa, this was not a duty, it was home. The one place she had chosen for herself with her own hands that no one had forced on her. But in the world of the gods, beauty is never only beauty. It is also a threat, and Medusa's was far too great to go unnoticed. But there was something in Medusa no discipline could hide. She was beautiful. Not a common beauty, but the kind that stopped people in the middle of the road. And the legend says that little by little, pilgrims began coming to the temple, not only to honor the goddess, but to see the priestess. Her dark hair falling over her shoulders, her voice filling every corner when she sang the hymns. The calm, exact way she moved during the ceremonies. The temple, which once received a few faithful, began to fill all the way to the steps. And then, someone whispered the words that would doom everything. They said Medusa was more beautiful than the goddess herself. Words like that do not stay on the ground. They rise, and those rose slowly to the very top of Olympus. They say Athena heard those words, and something cold lit up inside her. She was no ordinary goddess. She was wisdom, strategy, the just war. And yet, the legend shows her here, in her most human and most dangerous form, wounded in her pride, because mortals no longer came to her temple to worship her. They came to gaze at her priestess. The goddess told herself it was not Medusa's fault, that the girl only did her duty. But resentment, once lit, rarely listens to reason. The legend leaves us here with an uneasy image of one of the most respected deities in all of Greece. Athena was wisdom. She was justice, strategy, the cold mind that weighed every choice before acting. And yet, the myth shows her capable of something deeply human, and for that very reason, deeply dangerous. The fear of being replaced. It was not Medusa's beauty that hurt. It hurt that mortals had begun to forget her. That her sanctuary filled for the priestess and not for the goddess it was built to honor. Slowly, in Athena's mind, Medusa stopped being a devoted servant and began to become a rival. And while that poison grew in silence at the top of Olympus, down on the earth, Medusa kept lighting her lamps every dawn, never imagining that her devotion had become, without her ever wanting it, an offense that someone, one day, would make her pay for. And someone else was watching. Someone who had long been waiting for a crack in Athena's armor. Poseidon, god of the seas, had hated Athena for generations. Legend says the two had once clashed over a city, the most coveted in all of Greece. Each offered its people a gift to win their devotion. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident and made a spring burst forth. Athena grew an olive tree. The mortals chose the olive tree. They chose Athena, and the city would forever bear her name, Athens. Poseidon never forgave that humiliation. And now, seeing Athena's frustration with her own priestess, he found the perfect revenge. Not the goddess herself. He would strike what she valued most, the purity of her temple. Legend says it happened early one morning when Medusa walked alone on the shore, gathering shells for the altar. The sun was barely rising over the horizon. She did not hear the sea stir behind her. She did not feel the presence until a voice spoke her name. What happened next, the myth tells without mercy. Poseidon wanted her, and Medusa refused him. No mortal had ever told a god no. She ran, She ran to the one place she thought she would be safe, the temple of Athena, sacred ground, the place where the gods were supposed to hold back. But Poseidon did not stop at the steps. Sacred ground did not stop him. His enemy's presence did not stop him. He entered the sanctuary, and on the very stones where Medusa had prayed 1,000 perfect prayers, the god took by force what she had denied him. Here, the legend lowers its voice, and so do we. There is no need to show what happened, enough to understand what it meant. The most devoted priestess in all of Greece, inside the temple she had given her life to, was raped by a god. And when he was done, he left without looking back, leaving the sanctuary defiled and Medusa broken on the marble floor. She'd done everything right. She had kept her vows. She had said no. She had run. She had sought refuge in the most sacred place she knew. And none of it, absolutely none, had done anything to protect her. And then, the legend says, the statue of Athena began to move. The marble turned to divine flesh. The goddess left her pedestal, and for an instant, through the horror, Medusa felt something like hope. Her goddess had come. She'd comfort her, tell her it was not her fault. She would give her justice. But Athena's eyes brought no comfort. They brought fury. And the legend says the goddess did not aim that fury at Poseidon, the god who had defiled her temple. She aimed it at Medusa, at the victim. She told her that her beauty had caused all of it, that her rituals, too perfect, had led men away from the true path, that her mere presence had stolen the eyes that belonged to the goddess. If only she had been humbler, if she had not sung with that voice, if her hair had not fallen that way during the ceremonies, none of this would have happened. Medusa tried to speak. She tried to explain that she had asked for none of it. But the words stayed trapped in her throat. And the goddess spoke her punishment. The transformation, the myth says, was slow, painfully slow. Medusa's skin began to harden, to cover itself in cold scales. Her dark hair, the hair so many had admired, began to move on its own, strand by strand, until it became a nest of living serpents hissing around her face. And her eyes, which once brought tears to those who heard her sing, became a curse. From that moment on, any living thing that met her gaze would be turned to stone forever. And the cruelest part of all was none of those things. The cruelest part was what that punishment meant. Athena did not turn her into a powerful beast that could avenge herself on the god who assaulted her. She turned her into something that could never come near anyone again. She took her face, her voice, her place in the world, and made sure every living thing that crossed her path would die. She condemned her to never be looked at with love again. She condemned her to the most absolute solitude imaginable. And when it was over, Medusa was no longer the priestess. Now, the Gorgon, the monster, exactly the creature the world would remember, never once asking how it had come to exist. The legend says Medusa fled. She sought the most remote place in the world, a land of rock and caves, far from any city, where no one could find her. Not out of fear of men, but the opposite. Because now, she was the one who could destroy them with a single look. Every creature that came close, every bird, every animal, every lost traveler, was turned to stone the instant it met her eyes. And so, for years, Medusa lived surrounded by statues, stone figures, frozen in the last gesture of their lives, terror still carved into their faces. A silent garden of victims. Imagine what that solitude meant. The legend says Medusa still kept the mind of the woman she had been. She remembered the temple, the hymns, the feel of the sun on her face when she was still human. She remembered who she was before that morning. But no one could come near her now without dying. She could not be seen. She could not be touched. She could not meet another living thing's eyes without turning it to stone. Athena's punishment had not been only to make her a monster. It had been to condemn her to a solitude without end, in which every creature that came to kill her ended as one more statue in her garden of the dead. And among all those stone figures, Medusa waited, without knowing for what. The legend says many were heroes, young men who had come armed and proud, determined to kill the monster and carry its head home as glory. They all stayed there, turned to rock, keeping company with the woman who had once been a priestess. Until one day, someone different came. His name was Perseus. The legend says Perseus did not come by his own will. A cruel king who wanted to be rid of him had sent him on an impossible mission, hoping he would never return, to bring back the head of Medusa. It was, in practice, a death sentence. No one survived the Gorgon's gaze. But Perseus would not be alone. And here, the myth hides a bitter irony. Because the gods who chose to help him were, among others, Hermes, the messenger, and Athena herself. Yes, the same goddess who had condemned Medusa was the one who guided the hand that would kill her. Perseus's first problem was that he did not even know where to find the Gorgon. And to learn it, the legend says he had to seek out 3 strange and ancient creatures, known as the Graiai. They were 3 sisters born old, gray-haired from the very first day, who shared among the 3 a single eye and a single tooth, passing them from hand to hand to see and eat in turns. Perseus watched them in silence, waited for the exact moment they passed the eye from one hand to another, and snatched it from the air. Without their only eye, the 3 old women were blind and helpless, and they had no choice but to reveal the path he was seeking. That path led him to nymphs, who guarded objects capable of defeating a monster. From them, Perseus received 3 gifts: winged sandals to fly over land and sea, a special pouch, the only one that could safely hold the head of the Gorgon, and a helm belonging to the Lord of the Underworld, able to make anyone who wore it invisible. Hermes added a curved sword so sharp it cut through anything in a single stroke. And Athena gave him the most important object of all, her own shield, polished until it shone like a mirror, because that, and only that, was the way to defeat Medusa. Never looking into her eyes, looking only at her reflection. The legend says Perseus entered the lair at nightfall, moving among the stone statues, not daring to raise his eyes. He found Medusa asleep, and instead of looking at her, he raised Athena's shield and watched her reflected in the metal, like someone watching a shadow to avoid the real thing. He raised the sword, and with a single stroke, he ended the agony that had begun years before on the floor of a temple. 3 seconds. The time it takes a blade to cross a throat. But the legend still holds one final surprise. Because when Medusa's head fell, From her blood, from her open neck, two creatures rose, a giant named Chrysaor and a winged white horse, the most beautiful the world had ever seen, Pegasus. They were the children of Medusa and Poseidon, who had been inside her all that time. Even in her death, from that woman marked by tragedy, something was born that could fly. Perseus put the head in his pouch. And here is the cruelest part of all. Medusa's head, even severed from the body, even lifeless, kept its power. It still turned to stone anyone who looked at it. And Perseus used it as a weapon all the way home. The legend tells of several such times, and in each one, Medusa's face went on doing, in death, what in life she never wanted to do. When a giant titan named Atlas refused him rest and shelter, Perseus raised the head before him, and the colossus was turned into an immense chain of stone mountains, the ones that, in the myth, hold up the sky to this day. Later, when he found a young woman named Andromeda chained to a rock by the sea, offered in sacrifice to a sea monster, it was again Medusa's gaze that petrified the beast and saved the girl, who would go on to become his wife. And when he finally returned home and found the cruel king who had sent him to die mocking him, not believing he had completed the mission, Perseus raised the head one last time. The king and his whole court froze into stone. The laughter still stopped on their faces. Only then, his task finally done, Perseus handed the head to the one who had silently wanted it from the very start. To Athena, the goddess placed Medusa's face on her shield. And so, the priestess who was once punished for being too beautiful ended as the war emblem of the very goddess who destroyed her, freezing Athena's enemies forever. The legend calls that image the Gorgon, and for centuries, the Greeks painted it on their shields and their walls, not to remember the victim, but to frighten their enemies. Now there is something few people mention, and it is worth saying honestly. This version of Medusa, the innocent victim punished by an injustice, is not the oldest version of the myth. We find it, above all, in the Roman poet Ovid, in his work The Metamorphoses, written around the year 8 of our era. It was Ovid who told the story of the beautiful young woman, the temple, the betrayal, and Athena's punishment. In the oldest Greek version, that of the poet Hesiod, several centuries earlier, Medusa is simply born as one of the three Gorgons, with no story of innocence or punishment. It is Ovid who turns the monster into a woman who gives her back a human face. Who asks the question no one wanted to ask? What if the monster was never the villain of her own story? And perhaps that is why, more than 2,000 years later, the legend of Medusa is still so alive. Because it stopped being only the story of a hero who killed a beast. It became something else. The symbol of the victim blamed for what was done to her, of the woman punished for her own beauty, of injustice disguised as a monster, so no one would have to face it head on. For centuries, artists painted and sculpted her as a monster, mouth open and fangs bared, an image made to frighten. But over time, something began to change in the way she was seen. More beautiful, as if generation after generation, the world were slowly remembering that beneath the serpents was a woman. Today, her face is everywhere, in art, in fashion, in culture. No longer only the beast to fear, but as the reminder of an uneasy question the ancient world tried to bury and never quite managed to. The question of how many monsters in our stories were in truth victims that someone needed to turn into villains. How many Medusas there were whose only crime was what others did to them. Because in the end, that is what the great legends do. They do not need to have been real to tell a truth. Medusa perhaps never existed. But what her story tells us about ourselves, about who we call a monster and who we let walk free, is as true today as it was 3,000 years ago. A legend does not need to be real to stay alive.